A lawyer says the forestry sector is facing a leaky building style debacle, and it will probably be left up to the courts to decide who's liable for the damage caused by tons of debris washing down into Tolaga Bay, the East Cape, of course, earlier this month. Hazel Armstrong is calling for a complete overhaul of the rules governing the sector, but forest owners say it's not needed. The government says it's waiting for more information before it considers whether changes should be made. Looking at all of this for us is our reporter Anusha Bradley.
Claire Parker's family farm in Tolaga Bay has suffered hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of damage from forestry slash. And at a meeting with forestry companies last night, her question was simple.
We as farmers, we pay public liability. If we harmed our neighbour's land, we'd be having to cough up. So, question to the forestry, will you guys be paying your public liability to us?
There's 7 seconds of awkward silence before Ian Brown from Hikurangi Forest Farms answers.
It's not the kind of conversation we can enter into at this point in time.
Wellington-based lawyer Hazel Armstrong says it's standard practice for forestry contracts to have public liability insurance, but she believes it's unlikely insurance companies will pay out in Tolaga Bay.
It will be left to the court to determine where liability sits, because everyone will be pointing the finger at someone else, and the insurance companies will be saying, well, actually, guys, it was foreseeable. You always knew that if you Claire felt that this was a risk, it was a risk that you took.
Hazel Armstrong knows this sector well. She was on the Industry Forestry Safety Review Board in 2014, which investigated the high number of deaths in the industry and made recommendations on how accidents can be prevented. She says, like the deregulation of the construction industry, which led to leaky homes, the deregulation of the forestry industry has made it difficult to hold anyone to account over the slash issue in Tolaga, and an overhaul is needed.
Successive governments have left the forestry sector to its own devices. There's been no leadership, inadequate regulation, and inadequate oversight of the sector. Knowing the forestry sector as I do, they will be pointing the finger down the supply chain. So the forest owners will point down to the management companies, who will then point down to the contractors. But in actual fact, it's a system failure.
The spokesperson for the Forestry Owners Association, Don Carson, disagrees.
We've just gone through an overhaul of the regulations. The National Environmental Standard for Plantation Forestry came in on the 1st of May. Now, it's not retrospective, so it doesn't apply to the slash that came down the rivers at Tolaga Bay.
But Don Carson says the sector is aware of its need to improve.
We're looking at the vulnerability to climate change increase in intensity, frequency of storms, and we're looking at our harvest practices to reduce the risk of what happened in Tolaga Bay. We are working on this. There are no easy solutions. If there were easy solutions, we would have done them.
The Associate Agriculture Minister, Meka Whaitiri, says it's still too early to say who should pay for the clean-up and whether more regulation is needed.
I want to make sure that I've got all the information in front of me before we make that decision. We still have roads closed up in parts of Tolaga Bay, and so we've got to make sure that we are able to assess fully the damage that has occurred across the whole region, because at the moment you can only view it from the air, and we need to make sure that when we do make that call, whether it's reviewing the regulations, that we're fully informed.
In the meantime, frustrated Tolaga Bay landowners must wait. The Gisborne District Council says it could take up to 6 months to investigate whether forestry owners have breached their resource consent conditions. In Napier for Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.